It was a busy Friday evening, the kind of night when the local restaurant was packed with families enjoying their meals and catching up on their week. Laughter filled the air as kids ran around, and the smell of sizzling food made everyone's stomachs growl in anticipation. Waitresses moved between tables with practiced ease, greeting customers with smiles and guiding them to their seats. A young woman wheeled herself into the restaurant, pushing her chair slowly across the smooth floor. The buzz of the crowd seemed to fade as she entered, and all at once she became aware of the eyes that turned in her direction. She didn't mind the attention, at least she told herself she didn't. It was something she had grown used to over the years. But tonight felt different. Tonight she was feeling more vulnerable than usual, more exposed. The wheelchair wasn't something she could hide, and sometimes it felt like it was all people saw when they looked at her. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She stood out. People often stared, some with curiosity, others with pity, and some simply because they couldn't help themselves. She understood it, of course. It wasn't easy for people to look past the wheelchair, but sometimes it made her feel like she was invisible in all the wrong ways. She maneuvered through the restaurant, her eyes scanning for an empty table. She was used to eating alone, even though it was always a little lonely. She wasn't shy, but it was hard to make connections when the world seemed to treat her as if she was different. But tonight she was determined to have a good meal, maybe even enjoy a bit of company if she was lucky. As she approached a small corner table, she was relieved to see it was empty. She rolled her chair into position and glanced around. A few people still looked her way, but it wasn't as bad as she had feared. The waitress came over, her smile bright and welcoming. "Good evening. Are you ready to order, or would you like to take a few more minutes?" the waitress asked kindly. "I'm ready," the woman replied with a soft smile, relieved to get the interaction over with. She didn't want to draw attention, but small talk with the staff always made her feel more comfortable. They didn't treat her any differently because of the chair. "I'll have the grilled chicken, please, and a side of mashed potatoes." "Great choice. I'll bring that right out for you. Can I get you anything to drink?" "A glass of water will be fine, thanks," she answered, grateful for the friendly tone. The waitress nodded and walked away, leaving the woman to settle into the quiet moment, a feeling of solitude wrapping around her. She hadn't been to this restaurant in a while. It wasn't that she didn't like it. In fact, it was one of her favorites, but it was often too much to handle, too many people, too much noise. However, tonight she felt like being brave. She needed to remind herself that the world wasn't as bad as it sometimes felt. It was easy to become isolated, to stay in her apartment and avoid places where she might feel out of place. But tonight she was going to try something different. As she waited, she couldn't help but notice a father sitting a few tables away. He was with two kids, a boy and a girl, who seemed to be around 8 or 9. The kids were animated, laughing loudly as they shared stories about their school day, their voices rising over the noise of the restaurant. The dad listened patiently, occasionally chiming in with a smile as if he was genuinely interested in every word they said. There was something comforting about the way he interacted with his children. It was clear that he was doing his best to make the evening special for them, despite how busy the restaurant was. He seemed calm and relaxed, even though it was obvious that he had a lot on his plate. His hair was a bit messy, and his clothes were more casual than the other customers, but there was something genuine about him. The way he looked at his kids with affection, the way he gently corrected their behavior when they started getting too loud, it made her feel like maybe there were still good people in the world. She watched him for a few moments, a soft smile forming on her face without her realizing it. The children's laughter was infectious, and despite the fact that she was alone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth. The dad wasn't paying attention to her, but something about his energy made her feel more at ease. It was as if his presence was a reminder that, even in the middle of a crowded restaurant, not everyone saw her for her wheelchair. Some people just saw her as a person. Her thoughts were interrupted when the waitress returned with her water. "Here you go," she said, placing the glass gently on the table. "Your meal will be ready shortly." "Thank you," the woman replied, taking a sip of the water. It was cold and refreshing, and she felt a little more relaxed. As she waited for her meal, she noticed that the father and his kids were still talking and laughing, their voices rising above the hum of the restaurant. The kids seemed to be telling him about their day at school, sharing funny stories and asking endless questions. He answered each one patiently as if nothing else mattered in that moment but his children. She couldn't help but admire his calmness. It wasn't something she saw often in her world. There was something about this dad that made her want to know more. He seemed real in a way that a lot of people didn't. His life wasn't perfect, and he wasn't trying to be anything he wasn't. He just seemed kind, and that was a rare quality to find in a world where everyone was too busy to stop and listen. As the kids continued their chatter, she glanced over at the table next to her, where an elderly couple was eating dinner in silence. They looked content, but the woman couldn't help but notice how their hands rested on the table, neither one reaching for the other. It made her wonder if they were still in love, if they had lost that spark over time, or if they had ever had it at all. But the father and his kids were different. There was something special about the way they interacted, something that made her heart feel lighter. It reminded her of the kind of connection she longed for in her own life, genuine, simple, and free from judgment. She wasn't sure how long she had been lost in her thoughts when she heard a soft voice interrupt her. "Excuse me." She looked up to find the father standing beside her table, his kids in tow. For a moment she felt a flutter of nervousness. She hadn't expected him to approach her, let alone speak to her. But his expression was warm, not the least bit uncomfortable or awkward. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a slight smile. "My kids were wondering if they could ask you something. They noticed your wheelchair and they were curious." The woman's heart skipped a beat. She had seen this kind of thing happen before. Kids were often curious about her wheelchair, but it usually came with a sense of pity or an awkwardness that made her uncomfortable. But the father's voice was gentle, and his tone wasn't judgmental. It was just a simple request. She looked down at his kids, who were both standing by his side, waiting with wide eyes. "What did they want to ask?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. The little girl, no more than 8, took a step forward, her eyes full of innocent curiosity. "How do you move so fast in the wheelchair?" she asked, her voice full of genuine wonder. The woman smiled, surprised by the simple, honest question. "Well," she said, "I have to push the wheels myself. I can go fast, but I've had to practice a lot." The boy, who was a bit older, nodded as if this made sense to him. "That's cool. Do you ever race?" "I have raced a few times," she replied, enjoying the conversation more than she expected. "It's really fun when I do." The dad smiled at her, his eyes kind. "Thank you for answering their questions. They're always asking about things like that. It's nice to know they're not afraid of the different things they see in the world." She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Of course. It's nice to be able to share something with them." With that, the father and his kids returned to their table, leaving her with a sense of connection she hadn't expected. It wasn't a deep conversation, but in that moment it felt like something genuine had happened. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in a long time, and as she sat there, waiting for her meal, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there were more kind people in the world than she had given credit for. As the woman sat at her table, she couldn't stop thinking about the brief conversation she'd had with the dad and his kids. It was a simple exchange, but it had left a lasting impression on her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a stranger in the room. She felt seen, not because of her wheelchair, but simply as a person. Her meal arrived soon after, interrupting her thoughts. The waitress placed the steaming plate of grilled chicken and mashed potatoes in front of her with a warm smile. The woman smiled back, thanking her quietly. She didn't often enjoy dining out alone, but tonight felt different. The anxiety that usually clung to her was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. As she dug into her meal, she glanced over at the father and his children. They were still chatting away, their voices filled with laughter. The dad seemed to be enjoying their company as much as they were enjoying his. His attention was completely on them, and it was clear he was doing his best to make their night special. He wasn't distracted by his phone or looking around the room. He was present with his kids, something that she hadn't seen much of in the world around her. She felt a strange sense of connection to him, though she had barely spoken to him. There was something about the way he treated his children that spoke volumes about who he was. He wasn't perfect, and he wasn't trying to be. But his kindness and patience were evident. It reminded her of what she missed in her own life. Someone who would simply listen. Someone who would be present without expecting anything in return. She finished her meal, slowly savoring the last bite of chicken. The restaurant was starting to quiet down a little as the evening wore on. but the noise still buzzed in the background. It was a typical evening in a busy place like this, but for her it felt unusually calm. There was something peaceful in knowing that she wasn't the only one here. Others were enjoying their time as well. As she sat back, a little full from the meal, the dad and his kids caught her eye once again. They were laughing about something, the kids telling exaggerated stories of their day at school, while the father chimed in with playful comments. She couldn't help but smile at their energy. It felt contagious. Then, to her surprise, the father stood up and walked over to her table. She hadn't expected that. A small knot of anxiety tightened in her chest, but it was different this time. He wasn't walking over with pity or with any intention to make her feel uncomfortable. His demeanor was warm, genuine, and almost effortless. "Hi again," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but my kids wanted to ask if you're having a good meal. They're curious about how people eat in a wheelchair." She blinked in surprise. It wasn't a question she'd ever been asked before. But then again, it wasn't a question that felt like it was meant to be insensitive. The kids were just asking out of curiosity. She nodded, a little amused by their boldness. "I'm having a great meal, thank you," she replied with a soft smile. "And as for eating in a wheelchair, it's pretty much the same as eating without one. I just have to make sure my plate doesn't fall off the table." The children giggled, their laughter filling the air around them. The little boy, who was probably about 9 years old, looked up at her with wide eyes. "That's really cool," he said, as if he had just discovered something amazing. "I didn't know it was that easy," she chuckled softly. "Well, it's not always easy, but you get the hang of it." The father smiled at her response, nodding in appreciation. "Thank you for being so kind to them. They always ask questions like that. But I never want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. I really appreciate you being so open." "It's no problem," she said, feeling a warmth spread through her. She realized she was genuinely enjoying this conversation, despite her usual discomfort with being noticed. They're curious. It's nice to see kids not shy away from something they don't understand. He nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at his children. "They've always been like that. I try to encourage them to ask questions and learn from others. The world's a big place, and it's important to understand what makes it so interesting." There was a pause as the woman took in his words. The father's genuine nature made her feel at ease, and for the first time she realized just how rare it was to meet someone like him. People usually didn't approach her unless they had to, but he wasn't like that. He was just a man, doing his best for his kids without any pretense. "I think that's a great way to raise them," she said quietly. "Not enough people ask questions anymore. Everyone is too afraid of being judged." His smile deepened and he glanced back at his kids. "Yeah, I agree. It's easy to get caught up in what others think. But the kids teach me a lot too. They remind me that it's okay to be curious, to make mistakes, and to just enjoy the moment." She nodded slowly, feeling a wave of gratitude. The conversation, though simple, was opening something inside her. A realization that she didn't always have to be afraid of the unknown. That even in the smallest interactions, people could be kind and understanding, without any ulterior motives. The father wasn't here to pity her, to make her feel less than anyone else. He was simply having a conversation, just like he would with anyone else. "I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me," she said, a bit shy now. "It's been a while since I've had a conversation like this. It's nice." The father's eyes softened even further and he nodded. "It's my pleasure. You never know when a small conversation can make a difference. I'm glad we could have this one." For a moment there was a silence between them, not uncomfortable but quiet in a way that felt peaceful. The kids, noticing that their father was still standing, began to look up, their faces curious as they waited to see if their conversation with the woman would continue. He glanced over at them, and then back at her. "We should probably get going soon, but I just wanted to say thanks again. It's good to meet someone who doesn't shy away from the tough questions." "No problem at all," she replied, smiling. "It's always nice to meet people who are just real." With that, the father returned to his table, the kids trailing behind him. The woman watched them for a moment, her heart feeling a little lighter than before. There was something about that family, something about the way they interacted with each other, that made her realize how important it was to embrace connection, to be open to new experiences, new people, and new moments. As she finished her meal, she couldn't help but reflect on how much that simple interaction had changed the way she was feeling. She had come into the restaurant expecting to spend the evening alone, to just eat and leave. But instead, she had found herself in a conversation that had lifted her spirits in a way she hadn't anticipated. And for the first time in a long time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there were still good, kind people in the world, people who saw her for who she was and not just her wheelchair, people who understood that a simple conversation could make all the difference. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The evening wore on, and the restaurant slowly began to empty. The noise of conversation started to quiet down, and the once bustling space became more relaxed, with only a few tables still occupied. The woman sat back in her chair, feeling full and content, but something else lingered in the air, something she hadn't expected when she walked in earlier that evening. There was a quiet sense of connection, a feeling that had settled in her chest, warm and soft. The father and his kids had long since finished their meal, and the kids had started playing with their phones, their laughter fading as they became absorbed in their screens. The father, however, remained present, his gaze lingering on the table as he absent-mindedly picked at his food. Every so often he glanced over at his children, making sure they were okay, making sure they felt secure and cared for. It was clear that his focus was entirely on them, even in the quiet moments. He didn't rush to finish his meal or check the time. There was a calmness in him that the woman admired. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a tug in her chest, a desire to return the kindness that had been shown to her. It wasn't often that people went out of their way to make her feel welcome, but this father, this stranger, had done just that. He had treated her like a human being, not someone to pity or avoid, and that small act of kindness had changed the way she saw herself, at least for the evening. After finishing her meal, the woman took a deep breath and pushed her chair back. It was still early, and she wasn't quite ready to leave yet, not just yet. As she rolled her wheelchair slowly toward the exit, she couldn't help but glance toward the father's table one more time. She noticed that he was still looking at his children, a gentle smile on his face as he listened to their stories. Without really thinking about it, she turned her chair toward his table and made her way over. She wasn't sure why she was doing this, but something inside her told her that this wasn't just any other evening. There was something different about tonight. She wasn't quite sure what it was, but it felt important. This moment, this interaction, this feeling of connection. As she approached the table, the father looked up, his face brightening when he saw her. He stood up slightly as if to acknowledge her presence, but didn't make any sudden movements. His body language was relaxed, and he gave her a polite, welcoming smile. "Hi again," he said, his voice friendly but not intrusive. "Is everything okay? I didn't want to interrupt your night, but..." "Well, I just wanted to thank you for being so kind earlier. My kids have been talking about the conversation we had with you all night." The woman smiled back, feeling a slight warmth spread through her. She had never expected her small interaction to have such an impact. "It was just a conversation after all." "It was really no trouble at all," she replied. "It's nice to talk to people who aren't afraid to ask questions. Not enough people do that." He nodded, his smile growing wider. "You're right. It's easy to avoid the things we don't understand, but it's much better to ask. I try to teach my kids to be open, to not be afraid of what's different. I guess you could say I learn a lot from them too." The woman felt a tug in her heart. It wasn't just the father's words that resonated with her, but the sincerity with which he spoke. He wasn't just saying what he thought sounded nice. He genuinely believed in the importance of understanding and embracing differences. It wasn't something she saw every day, but it was something she had always wished for. People who saw her for who she was, not just her disability. "I can tell," she said softly. "Your kids are lucky to have a dad like you." He seemed a little surprised by her compliment, but it made him chuckle. "Thank you. I'm just trying my best like everyone else. Raising kids is hard, but if we can teach them kindness and understanding, I think that's a win." There was a pause, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of pause that felt peaceful, like two people who didn't need to fill every silence with words. The woman was unsure of what to say next. Part of her felt like she had said everything she needed to say. But another part of her felt like there was more to this conversation, more to this moment that she couldn't quite put into words. Finally, she spoke. "You know, I don't always feel like I fit in. People often treat me like I'm different, like I don't belong in places like this." She gestured around the restaurant, though she didn't mean it in a negative way. But you? You didn't treat me that way. You just talked to me like a normal person. And that meant more to me than you know." The father's expression softened, and he sat back down in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm glad I could make you feel that way. I know that people sometimes don't know how to act when they see someone with a disability. It's not always easy for them, but it doesn't mean they have to treat you differently." She nodded slowly, thinking about his words. He was right. People often didn't know how to act. Sometimes they would glance at her with sympathy, or avoid eye contact altogether. She had learned to live with it, but it didn't mean it didn't hurt sometimes. To her, the wheelchair was just a part of her life, not who she was. But to others, it often became the first thing they noticed, and it was all they saw. "I think you're doing a great job," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I think we could all learn a little more about being present, about not judging others before we really get to know them." The father nodded again, his eyes thoughtful. "It's a work in progress, isn't it? But every small step counts." The woman smiled, feeling a sense of warmth fill her chest. It wasn't the kind of warmth she felt when someone pitied her or treated her like she was fragile. It was the warmth of genuine connection, two people understanding each other, even if just for a brief moment. "I hope I can do that too," she said. "I think we all have a lot to learn from each other." The father's smile widened, and his kids, noticing the interaction, glanced up from their phones. The boy, who was around 9, leaned forward and spoke shyly. "Are you leaving now?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. She nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time for me to head out." The little girl, still a bit shy, smiled at her. "Thank you for talking to us. You're really nice." The woman's heart warmed at the sincerity in the girl's voice. "Thank you," she replied, her smile genuine. "You're both really kind." As she turned to leave, the father stood up again, offering her a polite wave. "Take care," he said, his voice warm. "I hope our paths cross again sometime." "I'd like that," she said, feeling a small sense of peace settle over her. "Thank you for everything." With one last glance at the father and his kids, she turned and wheeled herself toward the exit. The night air was cool and crisp, and the city was quieter than usual. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the evening settle in her bones. It wasn't just the meal that had made this night special. It was the connection she had felt, a reminder that even in a world that often seemed distant and unkind, there were still people who saw her for who she truly was. As she made her way down the sidewalk, she felt lighter, like something had shifted inside her. It wasn't a grand change, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that the world was still full of good people. People who, like the father and his children, weren't afraid to be kind. People who took the time to listen and understand. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a little less alone in the world. The following days passed by quickly, each one blending into the next. The woman had returned to her usual routine, spending most of her time at home, working through the daily tasks that needed her attention. But there was something different this time. Something had shifted in her mind. The encounter at the restaurant kept replaying in her thoughts like a quiet, reassuring echo that she couldn't shake. She found herself reflecting on the father's words, his kindness, and the way he had treated her like just another person, not someone to pity or avoid. It was a reminder she hadn't realized she needed. It wasn't that she hadn't been treated kindly before, but there was something special about the way he had approached her. It had made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if for just a moment the world had paused and she was simply another person in the room, no different from anyone else. Her friends had noticed a change in her too. They told her she seemed more at ease, more confident. They weren't sure what had caused it, but they saw it. There was a spark in her that hadn't been there before. She found herself going out more, taking small steps to push herself out of her comfort zone. A week after the dinner, she went to a coffee shop she had never visited before. She sat by the window, watching people come and go, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. The coffee was good, but it wasn't the drink that made her feel better. It was the idea that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as isolating as it sometimes felt. Despite these small victories, the thought of the father and his kids lingered in her mind. She couldn't forget the way he had shown up for her in that simple yet powerful way. She wondered if he even remembered her. After all, it had been just a brief moment for him, a casual conversation. But for her, it had been something more, a reminder of the goodness that still existed in the world. she decided to return to the restaurant. It had been a week since that evening, and though she didn't expect to see him again, she felt like it was the right thing to do. She wanted to experience that sense of connection again, to see if the warmth she had felt in that moment could be found once more. She told herself it wasn't about seeking recognition, but rather about honoring the kindness she had received. When she entered the restaurant that evening, the familiar sounds of laughter and conversation greeted her. The place was busier than usual, but the atmosphere felt welcoming. She wheeled herself over to the same corner table where she had sat before, the one near the window. She ordered her usual meal, feeling a sense of calm as she sat back, taking in the sights and sounds around her. As she waited, she couldn't help but glance over at the tables nearby. She had no expectation of seeing the father again, but it was hard not to wonder. She thought about how much she had learned in the past week, how she had taken small steps toward feeling more confident, more connected to the world around her. It was a gradual process, but it felt good to make progress. To her surprise, just as she was finishing her meal, she noticed a familiar face across the room. It was the father, sitting at a table with his kids. They hadn't noticed her yet, but she couldn't help but smile. It was him, the same warm smile, the same easygoing demeanor. His kids were engaged in conversation, and he was leaning in, listening to them with the same attentive care she had seen the week before. She wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to approach them to say hello, but she didn't want to interrupt their time together. After all, she was just a stranger to them. But then she remembered the kindness he had shown her, the way he had made her feel welcome. Maybe, just maybe, she could return that kindness just like she had thought about before. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. She wheeled herself toward their table, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She wasn't nervous exactly, but she didn't want to impose. She approached the table slowly, her presence unnoticed at first. The children were busy talking, but the father looked up when he sensed someone nearby. His face lit up with recognition. "Hey, it's so good to see you again," he said warmly. His voice had the same friendly tone, and there was no hesitation in his manner. It felt like they had known each other for much longer than just one short conversation. His kids looked up curiously, but the father quickly introduced them. "This is my son," he said, gesturing to the boy who was around 9. "And this is my daughter." He smiled at her before turning back to the woman. "We were just talking about how we'd run into you again one of these days." The woman felt a warmth fill her chest. "I didn't expect to see you here again," she replied. "I just wanted to come by and say hello. I've been thinking about our conversation a lot since we met." The father raised an eyebrow, his smile softening. "I'm glad you stopped by. Honestly, we were all talking about how nice it was to meet you. I think my kids have learned a lot from the way you talked about things. It's not every day you meet someone who's willing to share and be open." His words touched her more than she expected. She had never thought of herself as someone who could teach others. But in that moment, she realized that even the smallest interactions could have an impact. She glanced down at the kids who were both looking at her curiously, their eyes wide with interest. She smiled at them, feeling a sense of connection that she hadn't anticipated. "You know," she said gently, "I've been thinking about what you said that night, about being open and asking questions. It's easy to get caught up in our own worlds, but asking questions, being curious, it really does make a difference." The boy nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's what my dad always says. We should ask questions so we understand more." The little girl smiled shyly. "Are you going to stay for dessert?" she asked, her voice soft. The woman chuckled. "I wasn't planning on it, but you never know. Maybe I'll stay for a little while longer." The father's smile deepened. "We were just about to order dessert. You're more than welcome to join us." For a moment she hesitated. She didn't want to intrude on their time, but something in her felt like this was the right moment. Maybe it wasn't about perfect timing or planning. Maybe it was just about connecting with people no matter where or when. "I'd love to," she said, smiling at the kids. "I'll stay for a bit." She sat down at the table with them, and for the first time in a long while she felt completely at ease. They didn't treat her like she was different. They didn't look at her wheelchair with pity or discomfort. They treated her like a person, a part of their conversation, and that was all she had ever wanted. The father asked her more questions, and they talked about everything, from their favorite foods to the funny things the kids had done at school. It was simple, but in that simplicity she found something that felt rare and precious. As they shared a dessert together, she realized that this evening was not about anything grand or significant. It wasn't about some big gesture or a life-changing moment. It was just about people being kind, being open, and sharing a moment of connection. And in that simple moment, the world felt a little less lonely, a little more human. As she left the restaurant that night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not just for the meal or the conversation, but for the reminder that kindness could come in unexpected ways. Sometimes the smallest gestures could leave the biggest impacts, and that, she thought, was something worth remembering. She hadn't expected to find a connection that night, but in a way she had found something far more meaningful. She had found the kind of understanding that made the world feel a little more welcoming, a little more hopeful. And that, she realized, was all anyone could ever ask for. Weeks passed since that evening at the restaurant, and the woman found herself thinking back to it often. It wasn't the meal or the dessert that stayed with her, though they had been lovely. What lingered in her thoughts was the connection she had made with the father and his children. It had been an encounter that left her feeling different, more hopeful, more open to the possibilities around her. She had returned to her normal life, but something had changed. Every time she went out, she felt a little braver. She started to visit places she had once avoided, like the local park, and she spent more time with her friends, pushing herself to engage in conversations rather than staying on the sidelines. It was as if that simple exchange had reminded her that there was goodness in the world, that there were people who would see her for who she truly was and not just the wheelchair she used to get around. Her friends noticed the change too. They commented on how much more confident she seemed, how she seemed lighter, more at peace. And for the first time in a long time, she felt that too. It wasn't a huge shift, but it was enough to remind her that small moments could make a big difference. One evening, a few weeks after the dinner, she found herself sitting at her favorite coffee shop. It wasn't too busy, and the quiet hum of the machines mixed with the soft chatter of people made it a peaceful place to be. She was reading a book, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the family she had met that night. The father's kindness and the warmth of his children had left an impression on her, one that wasn't easy to shake. She realized that she hadn't just gained a new sense of confidence from that evening. She had also learned something important. She had learned that it was okay to be vulnerable, to let others see her for who she was, and that there was strength in that. Just as she took a sip of her coffee, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from one of her close friends. The text read, "Hey, I saw something today that reminded me of you. I was at the restaurant downtown and I saw a family eating there. The dad was really kind to a woman in a wheelchair. It made me think of you." She couldn't help but smile. It was the same restaurant. She'd been thinking about that place recently, wondering if she would ever see the father and his kids again. It seemed like the universe was nudging her, as if it were trying to bring the story full circle. Her heart fluttered with excitement, but she also felt a little unsure. Would they remember her? Would they even want to see her again? After all, they were strangers who had crossed paths once. Maybe it had been a fleeting moment for them, but for her it had meant so much more. She decided to take a chance. A few days later, she found herself heading back to the restaurant. Her heart beat a little faster as she entered, the familiar warmth and bustle of the place wrapping around her. She wheeled herself to the same corner table where she had sat weeks ago, the one by the window. She was determined not to expect anything, but part of her hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would see the father and his children again. She ordered a simple meal, the same grilled chicken and mashed potatoes she had enjoyed before. As she waited, she couldn't help but glance around, her eyes searching for a familiar face. The restaurant was busy, but she didn't see them right away. She told herself to relax, to not get her hopes up. After all, they might not even remember her. Maybe they had moved on from that brief encounter just like she had with so many other people in her life. But just as she was beginning to settle into her meal, she looked up and saw him. The father. He was sitting at a table with his children, their usual bright energy filling the air around them. It took her by surprise, and for a moment she hesitated. Should she approach them again? Would they want to talk to her? Or had they moved on from that night? The uncertainty tugged at her, but before she could talk herself out of it, the father looked up and saw her. His face lit up with recognition, and a wide smile spread across his face. It was as if no time had passed at all. He stood up, his eyes warm and inviting, and walked over to her table. His kids followed behind him, their curiosity piqued. "Hey, it's so good to see you again," he said, his voice full of friendliness and familiarity. "I didn't expect to run into you here." She smiled back, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. "It's good to see you too," she replied, her voice steady but filled with warmth. "I actually came in hoping to see you again. I've been thinking about that night a lot." The father's smile grew even wider. "I'm glad you stopped by," he said, pulling up a chair to sit down beside her. "The kids have been asking if we'd run into you again. They haven't stopped talking about the conversation we had that night." The woman felt a sense of gratitude and warmth swell inside her. She hadn't expected to make such an impact on them, but it seemed like her words had left a mark. She glanced at the children, who were both smiling shyly, their eyes bright with curiosity. The little boy spoke up first. "You were really nice. I liked how you didn't mind our questions," the woman chuckled. "I liked how you asked them. Not everyone is as curious as you are." The little girl smiled shyly. "You made us think about how we talk to people. We shouldn't be afraid to ask questions." Her words touched the woman's heart. It was amazing how a simple conversation could have such an impact. The kids were learning the same lessons that the woman herself had been trying to learn, about being open, being kind, and being willing to connect with others. The father nodded proudly. "They're good kids. I try to teach them that it's important to ask questions, to be kind, and to never make assumptions about people." "I think you're doing a great job," the woman said, her voice sincere. "They've clearly learned a lot." There was a pause, a comfortable silence that settled over the table. It wasn't awkward at all. It felt like a natural continuation of the conversation that had started weeks ago. She realized in that moment that this wasn't just about two people meeting by chance. It was about the small, meaningful connections that could be made in the most unexpected places. The father leaned forward a little. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "we've all learned a lot from that night. From you. You reminded me how important it is to connect with people, to make time for those little moments that can really change someone's day." The woman was quiet for a moment, taking in his words. It was rare for someone to express something so genuine, and as she sat there looking at him and his kids, she realized how much that night had impacted her as well. It wasn't just the kindness they had shown her, it was the lesson that had come from it. That lesson about being open, about taking the time to talk to people, to ask questions, and to see the world through others' eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about that too," she said finally. "I think sometimes we get caught up in our own lives and forget that it's the small things that matter, like a simple conversation, or just being kind to someone when they need it." The father nodded, his eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "I think that's something we could all remember a little more. The world can be a tough place, but moments like this, these are the things that make it better." They spent the next hour talking, sharing stories and learning more about each other. The kids told her about their school projects and their favorite hobbies, and the father talked about his work and how challenging it had been to balance everything while raising his children on his own. It was a conversation full of small human moments, the kind that made life feel real and meaningful. As the evening wore on, the woman knew it was time to leave. She had enjoyed their company, but she didn't want to overstay her welcome. As she stood up, the father stood with her. "It was really great to see you again," he said, his voice warm. "Thank you for coming by. It's funny. Sometimes the best connections happen when we least expect them." The woman smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. "It really was. Thank you for everything." As she left the restaurant that night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the simple moments of connection she had shared. She realized that it wasn't just about meeting new people. It was about being open to the world around her, to the possibility of kindness and understanding. And that, she thought, was the most beautiful thing of all. The world could be tough, and people could be distant, but there were still moments like this. Moments that reminded her that there was so much goodness in the world, and sometimes, all it took was a small conversation to bring that goodness to life. The days that followed her visit to the restaurant seemed to flow differently, almost as though something had shifted inside her. There was a new sense of connection to the world around her, one that felt more genuine, more grounded. Each interaction, no matter how small, held more meaning. She started to notice things she hadn't before. The kindness in a stranger's smile, The way people helped each other without a second thought. The small but impactful moments of human connection that often went unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. It wasn't that she had suddenly found the answers to all of life's questions or that she had become someone entirely new. It was more that she had learned to slow down, to truly see people for who they were, and in turn, to allow herself to be seen for who she was. The world, she realized, wasn't nearly as isolating as she had once believed. It was full of little moments where people reached out, where they offered kindness even in the most unexpected places. That sense of openness continued to grow. She started volunteering at a local community center, helping out with events and lending a hand whenever she could. It wasn't about seeking recognition or approval. It was about giving back, about finding ways to create those connections she had experienced at the restaurant. She wanted others to feel that same warmth, that same reminder that they weren't alone, even on the toughest days. One afternoon, while she was organizing some materials for a charity event, she received a message from one of her friends. The text was simple but enough to stir something inside her. "I saw a post today. You won't believe this, but it was about that dad and his kids you met at the restaurant. They were talking about how you made such a big impact on them. They've been telling everyone how kind you were, and how you made them think differently about the world." She couldn't believe what she was reading. It was surreal to think that something as small as a conversation could have left such an impact. She had never expected to be the one making a difference. In fact, she often felt like she was the one learning from others, not the other way around. Yet here was this message, a reminder that even the simplest moments could have ripples far beyond what she could see. The message stirred something deep within her, a sense of gratitude and humility. She realized that her connection with the father and his kids hadn't just been a fleeting encounter. It had been a turning point, not just for her, but for them as well. She had opened herself up to them, and in return, they had shared a part of themselves with her. It was a reminder that, no matter who you were or where you came from, you had something valuable to offer. All it took was the willingness to connect. A few days later, she found herself back at the same coffee shop where she had first received the message. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that made her feel like the world was at peace. As she sipped her coffee, her mind wandered back to that first encounter, the father and his kids. The warmth they had shown her was still fresh in her memory, and the thought of them made her feel both grateful and hopeful. Just as she was finishing her drink, her phone buzzed again. It was a text from the same friend who had messaged her before. "I think you should meet them again. They've been talking about you so much lately. They're planning to come by the community center next weekend to visit. I think it would be nice if you were there too." She stared at the screen, her heart racing slightly. The thought of seeing them again filled her with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She hadn't expected their paths to cross again, but now that the opportunity was there, she felt like it was something she shouldn't miss. She quickly responded, "I'd love to see them again. Thanks for letting me know." The next week, she found herself preparing for their visit. She wasn't sure what to expect, maybe a quick hello, maybe a brief catch-up, but she knew it would be something special. The community center was hosting an event for local families, and she was helping to set up the activities for the kids. It seemed like the perfect place for them to reconnect, a place where the energy was light and welcoming. When the day arrived, she was busy arranging tables and sorting supplies when she saw a familiar face in the doorway. It was the father, his 2 children beside him. They looked around the room, scanning for her, and when they spotted her, their faces lit up. The father's eyes met hers, and he smiled warmly. "Hey there," he greeted, walking over with his kids. "It's so good to see you again." The woman felt a wave of warmth fill her chest. It was a simple greeting, but it meant so much. She hadn't realized how much she had missed their presence until this very moment. "It's so great to see you too," she replied, smiling back at them. "I didn't expect you to come by today. It's a nice surprise." The little boy was bouncing with energy. "We wanted to see you again. We've been talking about how nice it was to meet you. Dad says you're really good at helping people, so we wanted to come see you in action." The woman chuckled, a bit surprised but touched. "Well, I'm happy to help out. It's nice to see you both again. Are you ready for the event? There are going to be a lot of fun activities." The little girl nodded eagerly. "We can't wait. We've been practicing our crafts at home." The father, looking proud, added, "They've been excited about this all week. I think they're hoping to win the prize for best craft." The woman smiled at the kids, feeling a sense of connection that was deeper than just a casual meeting. She didn't have to try hard to keep the conversation going. It flowed naturally, like they had known each other for much longer than they actually had. "Well," she said, glancing at the supplies she had arranged, "we have everything ready. There are some fun games and activities lined up. I think you're going to have a great time." As the event unfolded, the father and his kids were the center of attention in the best possible way. The children eagerly jumped from one activity to the next, their laughter filling the room. The woman joined in, helping the kids with their crafts, talking to the families, and enjoying the warmth of the community. It wasn't just about the event. It was about being surrounded by people who cared, who showed up, and who were willing to take part in something meaningful. As the event drew to a close, the father approached her again, his expression warm. "We just wanted to thank you again," he said. "The kids and I have learned so much from you. We're glad we crossed paths that night." The woman smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. I've learned a lot from all of you, too. You've reminded me how important it is to stay open to the world around you." The father nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It's easy to get caught up in everything, but sometimes it takes just one conversation to remind us of what really matters." The woman agreed. "I think you're right. It's those little moments, those connections that make all the difference." As the day ended and the families began to leave, the woman felt a quiet sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about the event or the activities. It was about the people she had met along the way. People who had shared a piece of their lives with her, who had shown her that kindness, understanding, and connection were the things that truly made the world a better place. She didn't know what the future held, or whether her paths would cross with the father and his kids again, but she knew that this experience had been life-changing. Not because of any grand gestures, but because of the simple, beautiful connections that had formed along the way. As she cleaned up the event space that evening, she realized that the most important thing she could do moving forward was to keep being open, to keep being kind, to keep asking questions, and to never underestimate the power of a simple conversation. Because in the end, it wasn't the big moments that mattered most. It was the small ones, the ones that touched your heart and made you realize that you weren't alone in the world. And that, she thought, was more than enough. Months had passed since the community center event, and the woman had found herself in a new chapter of her life. It wasn't that everything had suddenly become perfect. Life had its usual ups and downs, but something inside her had shifted. The small moments of connection, like the ones with the father and his children, had become more meaningful. They had reminded her that there was more to life than just getting through the days. There were people to meet, stories to hear, and kindness to be shared. She had been spending more time outside of her usual routine. Whether it was joining a local book club, attending workshops at the community center, or simply taking walks through the neighborhood, she was more engaged with the world than ever before. Her friends noticed the change too. They told her she seemed more relaxed, more open, and even more excited about life. She wasn't sure how to explain it, but she knew it was because of those simple, human moments that had made her see the world a little differently. One evening, while sitting in her living room, she received a message from the father. It was a brief note. "We're thinking of organizing a small charity event for families, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. You've been such an inspiration to us, and we think your presence would mean a lot to everyone." She read the message twice, her heart warming with every word. She hadn't expected anything like this, and the idea of being part of something bigger than herself filled her with gratitude. She thought back to that first evening they had met, to the unexpected kindness of the father and his kids. She had never imagined that something so small could ripple out and have a lasting impact, but here she was, being invited to be part of their efforts. She quickly replied, her fingers tapping out a response. "I would love to be part of it. Thank you for thinking of me. I'll be there." The next few weeks were filled with preparations for the event. The father and his children had worked tirelessly to organize it, bringing together families from all over the community. It wasn't a huge affair, but it didn't need to be. It was about bringing people together, about offering support to those who needed it, and about sharing moments of joy and kindness. As the event approached, the woman found herself thinking more about what this all meant. She had come so far from the person she had been when they first met. Back then, she had been unsure of herself, uncertain of her place in the world. But now she felt connected, not just to the father and his kids, but to everyone she met. It wasn't about the big gestures or the grand events. It was about being present, showing up for people, and allowing herself to be part of something bigger than just her own world. On the day of the event, the community center was buzzing with excitement. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, chatter, and the sound of music. Families had gathered, and volunteers were busy helping with the various activities. There were games for the children, tables full of food, and booths with information about local resources. It was a celebration of community, a reminder that people could come together to support each other, no matter their differences. When the woman arrived, she was greeted by the father and his children, who were busy setting up a table. Their faces lit up when they saw her, and it felt as though time had melted away. Despite the busyness of the event, it felt like no time had passed since they last spoke. The connection they shared was still there, strong and unwavering. "You made it," the father said, his voice full of warmth. "I'm so glad you're here." She smiled back, her heart swelling with appreciation. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it. This is amazing. Look at all these people coming together." He nodded, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Yeah, it's more than I ever expected. It's really humbling to see everyone pitch in and help, and I'm glad you're here to be part of it. You've made a bigger impact on us than you know." The woman felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't that she had done anything extraordinary. She had simply shown up, been kind, and shared a few words with them. But in return, they had shown her something she had been missing for so long, a sense of belonging, of being seen and heard. She wasn't just a person in a wheelchair. She was a part of this community, a part of something that was bigger than any one individual. "I'm just happy to be here," she replied softly. "This means a lot to me." As the event continued, the woman found herself surrounded by people from all walks of life, families with children, elderly neighbors, young adults just starting out in their careers. It was a mix of people, all united by the same goal: to support each other, to share what they had, and to make the community a better place. There was no judgment, no distance between them, just people sharing in the simple joys of being together. She spent the day talking to different people, getting to know their stories and sharing her own. It wasn't about making grand speeches or performing acts of charity. It was about listening, asking questions, and being present in the moment. She found herself connecting with people in ways she had never imagined. There was a sense of camaraderie, of togetherness that made her realize how powerful those small acts of kindness really were. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the community center, the father approached her again. He smiled, his face full of gratitude. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "You've been such an inspiration to us, seeing how you've opened up, how you've made so many connections. It's been a reminder to us that there's always room for more kindness in the world." The woman shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. "I'm just one person, but I think we all have something to offer. We all have the ability to make a difference, even in the smallest of ways." His eyes softened. "You've shown us that, without even realizing it." The kids, who had been running around with their new friends, came over to join them. They smiled up at the woman, their faces full of excitement. "This was the best day ever," the little boy exclaimed. "We made so many new friends, and we helped out too." The little girl nodded enthusiastically. "We got to do a project with the other kids, and it was so fun. I think we made a difference today." The woman smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. The children had embraced the spirit of the event with open hearts, just like their father. They were learning the same lesson she had come to understand: that the smallest acts of kindness could have a ripple effect, spreading out into the world in ways that couldn't always be predicted. As the event came to a close, and the families began to head home, the woman lingered for a while, helping to clean up and saying her goodbyes. There was a quiet satisfaction in the air, a sense of accomplishment and connection that made the day feel complete. It wasn't about the number of people who showed up or the amount of money raised. It was about the way everyone came together to support one another, to show up for their community. As she left the community center that evening, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She had been a part of something bigger than herself, and it had been one of the most fulfilling experiences of her life. It wasn't about changing the world in one grand sweep. It was about showing up, being kind, and allowing others to do the same. She knew that her journey wasn't over, that there were still more lessons to be learned, more connections to be made, and more moments of kindness to be shared. But for now, she felt content, knowing that she had made a difference, no matter how small, in the lives of others. And in turn, they had made a difference in hers. As the days went on, the woman continued to live her life with an open heart, ready to meet new people and share new experiences. She had learned that the world wasn't as big and overwhelming as it sometimes felt. There was always room for kindness, for understanding, and for making the world a little bit brighter, one small moment at a time. The days turned into weeks, and the woman found herself adjusting to a new way of living, one that was more connected, more open, and full of small moments of joy. She hadn't anticipated the changes that had come with her decision to step out of her comfort zone and engage with the world. But now, as she looked back on everything, it felt like a natural progression. She had spent most of her life trying to remain invisible, unsure of how she fit into the world. But now she was beginning to see that the world was full of opportunities to connect, to learn, and to grow. Her perspective had shifted. She was no longer just going through the motions of daily life. Instead, she was taking the time to appreciate the people she met, the places she visited, and the simple acts of kindness that often went unnoticed. One afternoon, while sitting in a quiet park, she received a call from the father. She hadn't spoken to him in a few weeks, and his voice immediately brought back memories of the event they had worked on together. There was a warmth in his voice, one that made her feel at ease right away. "Hey, it's me," he said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, not at all," she replied, smiling at the sound of his voice. "What's going on?" "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I've been thinking about everything lately. You've really made a difference in our lives, and I wanted to thank you again. The kids and I are doing well, and we've been talking about how we can continue the things we started during the event. We want to keep helping others, and we'd love to have you involved again if you're up for it." She felt a sense of warmth spread through her as he spoke. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them, with sincerity and gratitude. She had made an impact, one she hadn't fully realized at the time, and now here he was, reaching out to include her in their plans moving forward. "I'd love to help," she said without hesitation. "I've been thinking a lot about that day too. It felt like we were part of something really special, and I'd be honored to be involved again." "I knew you'd say that." He laughed softly. "The kids and I are planning to start a regular meetup for families in need, to help out with anything they might need, whether it's food, clothes, or just a friendly face. We want to create a space where people feel welcome and supported, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." Her heart swelled with emotion as he spoke. She had always wanted to make a difference in people's lives, but the path had never seemed clear to her. Now it felt like it was unfolding in front of her, one step at a time. "I'm in," she said, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. "Just let me know when and where, and I'll be there." The father agreed, and they spent a few more minutes discussing the details. He talked about the vision they had for the group, how they wanted to create a sense of community, a place where people could come together, share their stories, and find support. It wasn't about giving away things. It was about giving time, attention, and compassion. It was about creating a space where people could connect with one another, no matter their circumstances. As she hung up the phone, the woman felt a quiet excitement building inside her. This wasn't just another event, it was the start of something bigger, something that could truly make a difference in her community. She knew that her involvement wouldn't just help others, it would also continue to shape her own journey, helping her become the person she had always wanted to be. The following weeks were filled with preparation and planning. She worked closely with the father and his children, getting everything ready for the first meetup. They decided to hold it at the community center again, a place that had become a symbol of connection for them all. They reached out to local families, encouraging them to join, and the response was overwhelming. It was clear that there was a need for something like this, something where people could come together and find support, no strings attached. On the day of the first meetup, the community center buzzed with energy. Families arrived, some familiar faces, others new. The woman walked into the center, feeling the familiar sense of warmth and excitement that had been there the first time they had met. She saw the father and his kids already greeting people, offering help with food and directing people to different areas of the center. They had worked hard to make this day a success, and it was clear that their efforts were paying off. "Glad you could make it." The father greeted her as she entered, his smile as warm as ever. "We're ready to get started whenever you are." She returned his smile, her heart full. "This is amazing. You've really outdone yourselves." "We've had a lot of help," he said. "The community's come together in a big way. It's been incredible to see." As the day went on, the woman helped out where she could, offering assistance to families, chatting with people, and making sure everything ran smoothly. But more than that, she found herself connecting with the individuals there. She heard their stories of hardship, of perseverance, and of hope. She listened to the struggles that many of them faced, and she saw firsthand how much this space, this gathering, meant to them. There was one woman in particular, a single mother who had recently lost her job, who stood out. She was sitting quietly in a corner, looking at the food table, clearly unsure of where to start. The woman noticed her hesitation and approached her slowly, not wanting to intrude but wanting to offer a friendly face. "Hey," she said gently, "I'm glad you could make it today. Is there anything I can help you with?" The woman looked up, startled at first, but then her face softened. "I'm just trying to figure out what to do next. I'm so grateful for this place, but I feel a little lost, you know?" The woman nodded, her heart going out to her. "I can understand that. Life can be overwhelming sometimes, but you're not alone here. Everyone's just trying to get by, and we're all here to help one another." The woman smiled faintly, clearly comforted by the words. "Thank you. It's been hard, but seeing everyone here, it gives me hope. Maybe I don't have to do this alone after all." The woman felt a sense of fulfillment as she spoke with her. This was what it was all about, the connections, the moments of understanding. It wasn't about fixing things or offering solutions. It was about showing up for people, being there when they needed someone to talk to, and offering a sense of comfort, even if it was just through listening. As the day drew to a close, and the families began to leave, there was a sense of satisfaction in the air. People had connected, they had shared stories, and they had found support in ways they hadn't expected. It wasn't about the material things. It was about the intangible, the feeling of being seen, heard, and understood. The father came over to her, his eyes shining with pride. "We did it," he said. "It's just the beginning, but today was everything I hoped it would be." "Thank you for being a part of it," the woman smiled, her heart full. "It was my pleasure. I'm just so grateful to be here, to be part of something that really matters." As they said their goodbyes, she realized that this was the kind of work she had always wanted to do, connecting with people, helping them find a sense of community, and making the world a little bit brighter, one small act of kindness at a time. She had come a long way from the person she had been months ago, but she also knew that this journey wasn't over. There was so much more to do, so many more lives to touch, and so many more stories to hear. But for now, she was content. She had found her place in the world, not by chasing after big dreams, but by embracing the small moments of connection that made life so rich and meaningful. And that, she realized, was all anyone really needed.